Hello and welcome to Gamezillong Book Corner, where we take a look at fine pieces of kaiju-related literature. Today we'll be taking a look at a trio of classic kaiju titles created by the now-defunct Charlton comics based on 3 European giant monster movies. Gorgo, Konga, and Reptilicus. I'll explain the name change later, but let's start with Gorgo. Starting with an adaptation of the original film it's based on, a commonality with the other 2 titles, Gorgo follows the titular Gorgo and his mother Ogra, who goes unnamed in this series, but is still treated as a separate character, as they just kind of wander the world as wild animals. While some issues call back to others, quite a few seem to have characters that either forgot or simply never knew that Gorgo and his mother existed, which you'd think was the kind of news that had spread very quickly, given that they nuke New York City to little effect. Also, quite a few issues, perhaps too many, fall into the Cold War story trope of communist states hate America and will do everything in their power to destroy democracy, only for their ambitions to be quashed by Gorgo and Ogra just showing up and stomping around before moving on. It gets very old very quickly. After 23 issues, several of which were illustrated by famous comic artist Steve Ditko, hence the Ditko's Monsters hardcover books I showed earlier, Gorgo's run ended, only to be revived under the title Gorgo's Revenge, which was quickly changed after only 1 issue to The Return of Gorgo for a further 2 issues before ending for good. And now, let's move on to Konga. While the first issue is a retelling of the original movie, like Gorgo, there are a number of changes to the story. For starters, Dr. Decker, the mad scientist who acts as the film's lead villain, is a much more benevolent character who only accidentally influences the titular Konga into killing due to a psychic side effect of the experiments. But both he and Konga die by the end of the issue, so how can there be more story? In comes Sandra and Bob, characters from the movie who end up finding the remains of Dr. Decker's research and decide to replicate it, resulting in their pet monkey, ironically also named Konga, growing to giant size and becoming too big for normal society to understand, resulting in him being driven into the wilderness of the world. Sandra and Bob are constantly referenced throughout the series, acting as the conscience that Konga relies on to keep him from hating the human race that repels him so. The comic is ultimately about Konga wandering the world in search of love, and occasionally stopping the evil ambitions of those who would bring harm and persecution to others. Like Gorgo, the series ran for 23 issues, with Ditko also illustrating several issues here as well, before being revived under the title The Return of Konga, and again it was changed after only 1 issue to Konga's Revenge for the further 2. And finally, Reptilicus, or Reptosaurus the Terrible, you've no doubt noticed. Again, I'll get to that soon enough. Once again, the first issue is an adaptation of the titular film, while the second issue explains how Reptilicus revived following the Moonly, only for it to seemingly be killed off once more, which is appropriate, because then Charlton lost the Reptilicus license, resulting in them having to retitle the series to Reptosaurus the Terrible, and they clearly got their wires crossed on which issues were supposed to come out when. In addition to redesigning the monster to less resemble Reptilicus, the third issue, the first to use the Reptilicus title, introduces aliens, which were revealed a lot more timely in Konga and Gorgo, respectively, and also reveals that there are multiple Reptosauruses, something which does get explained in issue 4. Said issue reveals that the original Reptosaurus that was found frozen in the movie and the third Reptosaurus that was seemingly killed in the second issue are now both revived and traveling the world, causing destruction as they seek each other out, because it turns out they're different genders and they're seeking to mate, details of which were already spoiled by the previous issue. It further doesn't help that the next two issues act like there's only one Reptosaurus. Then issue 7 drastically redesigns both adult Reptosauruses, who are just trying to care for their children when humans decide to attack them. And finally, issue 8 has a mad scientist trying to control a young Reptosaurus with science, only to fail, and then the series was cancelled after this incredibly chaotic run. Aside from a cameo appearance in issue 12 of Gorgo, the only other comic appearance was a single follow-up issue that involved the Aztecs of the modern day mistaking Reptosaurus with the return of Quetzalcoatl. Konga is my favorite of the three, having a much more consistent theme across its entire run, with Gorgo coming in a second due to its rather random nature and reused plot elements, which I've discussed already. And last, and certainly least, is Reptilicus, which makes sense given how much of a chaotic mess this was. Look, give Gorgo and Konga a read, but leave Reptilicus to be forgotten by history. Well, I say that, but there was a movie based on Reptosaurus, as well as Konga TNT, which outright states that it's based on the Konga comic rather than the original movie. But this is Gamezillong Book Corner, so we'll save those for another time. And until next time, I'm Protomet. Farewell.